Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, beyond the headlines, beyond the spin. Straight facts, sharp analysis, and common sense conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Let's get started.
Welcome to another edition of Inside Politics. I'm Kevin Klein, joined once again by two of my colleagues. Jeff is still on holidays, but we have Lawrence Pinsky, a member of King's Council, a Winnipeg Sun columnist, and also Royce Coop, a Winnipeg Sun columnist and a professor at the University of Manitoba. We have lots to talk about this week, gentlemen, and especially the announcements that Mark Carney made yesterday. He made some large announcements about getting rid of the EV vehicle mandate and some other changes to Trudeau's policy. But what they're not mentioning is that he was part of Trudeau's team, and pretty much everybody that he's put in charge of dismantling Trudeau's policies happened to be Trudeau ministers.
Yeah, and it's an acknowledgement that these policies were no good from the start. The EV mandate, we knew it was damaging. The carbon tax, the list of things that are being deleted now that from the Trudeau era is adding up more and more. It makes you wonder why Canadians re-elected a Liberal government that was just going to overturn everything the last Liberal government did.
This is, in my view, it's not even clear what he's actually doing. It's again, I think that Mr. Poilievre called it the summer of Seinfeld or something like that, because Mr. Carney's put on a show about nothing, and it is a show about nothing. If you're a big car company and you had to fight this nonsensical EV mandate that was coming upon us in 2035, now it's postponed. I think it's not canceled. Isn't that right?
Right.
Yeah. So do you invest? Do you not invest? Do you trust this a Liberal government when, if you read Carney's book, it absolutely says that he's going to implement this. So when is he going to implement it? Is he not? Does it make any sense in our current energy environment? The answer is no. This is, again, waffling. He even waffles about waffling. It's really an abdication of his responsibilities and the responsibility of the Liberal government. And we see this, we've seen it again and again and again over week after week after week, and we've seen it this week again.
You know, I look at it from this perspective is that he's a business person, and he ran on the fact that he was a successful business person. He's worked in corporations. He's been the governor of the Bank of Canada and a good investor and such, and made hundreds of millions of dollars, which is great. But he should understand, I think, with that kind of experience, that talk is cheap. He really does seem to be suffering from a multiple personality. He wants to put in these conservative policies, but he doesn't put them in full time, if you will, right? They're there for now, and he's going to take it back, like you said, like he took the carbon tax back. But now he wants to introduce a new gasoline tax, which would be 17 cents. We spoke about that on the last show, which is carbon tax 2.0. I wonder how he is capable of making these types of announcements and being so strong on the fact that this is going to build Canada's economy when the jobs report came out and said, we've lost more jobs. In fact, in the last 3 months, Canada has lost 165,000 jobs. And let me just say to those that don't think it's a big deal, that shows us a start. It is just starting. The tariffs haven't been there that long. It is just starting, and businesses are leaving.
Businesses are leaving, and just on the carbon tax piece, that what he's doing isn't stopping it. He's hiding these policies, which is a classical thing to do for the Liberal Party, unfortunately. So, for example, the industrial carbon tax is a tax. We've talked about this before. It's a tax on everybody. It's a hidden tax, just like the old manufacturer sales tax was. It's a hidden tax. The gas tax is a hidden tax, all of us paying 17 cents. Each one of these policies is a hidden negative hit, frankly, on the Canadian economy. And we do see plants leaving. We saw the bottling plant. We talked about this last week as well. The bottling plant for Crown Royal in Ontario, we see it going. We see Mr. Ford taking the very unusual step of pouring out a bottle of Crown Royal. Very Americanized nonsense.
Yeah.
Instead of gathering people who run industries around the table and saying, what can we do to make the economy better? he instead cozies up to Mr. Carney over and over and over again, does these ridiculous stunts. None of that grows the economy. None of that. The role of government is to create the structure, not to intervene in the economy, but to create the economic framework for businesses to grow and employ Canadians.
Yeah.
And on this, they are failing miserably.
During my time in politics, I talked about that an awful lot, saying that it is the government's role to build a launching pad. We have to build a launching pad so businesses can be successful, so they can come here and they can invest. Sorry, Royce, I cut you off, but I think that that was a very good point that Lawrence made. We are kind of going down a path right now that is scary by losing 165,000 jobs and nobody talking about it.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing that's happening in Canada right now. Decreasing employment, especially amongst young Canadians, students that are returning to school. Just to speak to the point about the Prime Minister, over the summer, what we've seen are flip-flops on previous Liberal policies, and we've also seen a lot of heat, not very much light. We've seen the Prime Minister traveling. We've seen a lot of announcements. We've seen talk about MOUs that don't really mean that much in the grander scheme of things. And the truth is that I think Canadians are responding to this. I mean, even a Liberal politician can only get away with so much. It was just a few months ago that Mark Carney had a 57% approval rating. That was in June, and now Angus Reid is reporting that's dropped down to 51%. So he's gone down to 6% in just a few months, and you can connect that to some of these policy failures.
I'm sorry, Royce, you said he was at 50%, then went down to 51. So he was at 57?
He was at 57% in June in
Thank
Angus Reid's pollings. He's gone down to 51 over the course of a few months. The summer hasn't been good for Carney. In fact, it's been a bit of a disaster. I think people were waiting for action. When they elected him, they thought there was going to be a quick response. There was going to be, action, feet on the ground. And instead, we didn't really see that. We saw a government that equivocated, it flip-flopped, and it did some things that people could see weren't really that meaningful. And so the polls are starting to reflect that, and the unemployment numbers are a huge deal. They're going to hurt the government's popularity even more.
Well, I go back to something that Lawrence pointed out, that it's a hidden tax that Carney is introducing and will probably bring back for gasoline. But I recall during the campaign that Mark Carney quoted Premier Wab Kinew in Manitoba, who said, "Hey, you should get rid of the carbon tax and just hide it." So on a campaign trail, at least he was open about that, saying, "Oh yeah, maybe we need to take it off so it's not a consumer-facing tax," right? That was the terminology they used, which is, to Lawrence's point, then it's just a hidden tax. A tax is a tax is a tax. I mean, if it moves, it gets taxed. That's the way things work here. And the Crown Royal incident, and we talk about businesses leaving. I think Lawrence brought it up. I'm really shocked that Ford would do that. I mean, that's just playing politics. It's quite silly because there's their big plant is in Gimli, Manitoba, and they have another facility in Quebec. So they haven't left Canada, but I mean, they're doing what companies do. They're investing more in a U.S. property now because there's more ability to do that. It's easier to expand in the U.S. than it is in Canada. Look at Winnipeg. It would take you 14 years to get a permit to build a shed, for goodness sakes. We have too many barriers put up, and I think that goes back to what Carney is. We expected a lot from him. I don't want to pick on him a lot. But I really want to see Carney, the business person, come out and say, focus on what we have to fix first. Focus on us. But he seems to be focusing, a little bit on international politics and all that. It's like, listen, we can't invite company over or tell people what to do until our backyard is cleaned up.
Royce said it's been really a bad summer. Well, it's been a good summer for Mr. Carney's frequent flyer points. He's been flying all over the world, but achieving absolutely nothing, unfortunately. And it is really unfortunate. The hidden tax is even worse, I would argue. If you can't see the sources, it was one of the innovations that Prime Minister Mulroney brought in with the GST, which back then many people thought was a terrible idea, but actually was a really good idea to get rid of the manufacturer's sales tax and add in the GST, a value-added tax. a much better approach, a cleaner approach. We see what's happening, and it's easier to respond to it as the public. But when you look at what Mr. Carney's done, in fairness, even when you look back at his contradictory statements when he was the governor of the Bank of Canada or had other roles, he's been wrong, as is so common with so many economists, over and over and over again. And the problem now is when he was just dealing with monetary policy, that was one thing. But as the Prime Minister of Canada, we're all Canadians are going to pay the price for this. And what's even more boggling to me is you have a real issue between China and the United States. And we should be able to triangulate between those 2 points. But instead, we're losing on both fronts. Yep. How could that be? Yeah. It's just a complete failure of policy. And as I said last time, I wish it wasn't so. I want to be able to say, Mr. Carney, I was wrong. You're doing a great job. But objectively, you just can't say that.
Yeah. I mean, being a central banker, like you'll recall that in the election campaign, liberals are saying, "Oh, Mark Carney got us through the recession when he was leading the Bank of Canada." Well, no, he was not the one making decisions. He was the governor of the Bank of Canada. It was the Prime Minister Stephen Harper and the Finance Minister Joe Flaherty who were making the real decisions. And now we're discovering that maybe being the central banker, those skills don't transfer as well as everyone assumed they would into the role of political leadership, where there actually are tough decisions that have to be made. And Doug Ford, I kind of like that kind of theatrical populist politics. I grew up in British Columbia. We get all sorts of people pouring out bottles of liquor, doing crazy things, wearing hard hats. I think Doug Ford is genuinely disappointing. He's been genuinely disappointing during this tariff episode, consistently taking shortcuts, going for the kind of cheap shot, going for media coverage, going on American media, rather than doing the kind of constructive things that are gonna help Canadians get through this. I'm a big fan of Danielle Smith, Premier of Alberta. In this episode, she's been consistent, she's been principled, she's done great stuff for Canadians, much more so than Ford and Prime Minister Trudeau did in the early period of this. And Ford is just disappointing. It's embarrassing, to be honest, seeing him pour out a bottle of Crown Royal. Give me a break.
And why are you going to take on the largest manufacturer of alcohol in the world? The largest. And you're calling them out for 200 jobs. Some of those jobs did go to Quebec. None of the media is talking about that, right? They just talked about, hey, Crown Royal leaving Canada, blah, blah, blah. They haven't left yet. They could. And you're certainly making it easy for them when you start to do those kind of antics as a premier. But he and Carney are certainly, chumming around a lot together. It's like that old TV show. I think we're all old enough to remember it, Bosom Buddies. They should get T-shirts and stuff. But if you look at what's happened that we're talking about in the last 3 months, or what hasn't happened, and some of the financial issues we're having, let's add on top of that the crime that has happened in Canada. And not just within the last 3 months. Let's look at I think it's the last 3 weeks. An 8-year-old was killed while sleeping. A 3-year-old was raped and left for dead while asleep. A 46-year-old executed in front of his kids. An 11 and 24-year-old buried alive. Both died. A 54-year-old shot and nearly killed by a 12-year-old. And in Winnipeg, 12-year-olds robbing a Walmart and shooting at a police officer, and the 12-year-old was out on conditions for a previous charge.
Yeah.
How long can we go on by keeping our head in the sand? I mean, it's just ridiculous to me.
And to add to that, the stabbing attacks on the up north on the Indigenous reservation. Yeah. I don't like talking about individual criminal cases, but because you can't make policy based on individual horrific cases. However, where you see an actual trend and you see the fact that, these are recidivist criminals, people who commit the same crimes over and over and over again. The fellow up north who was killed by police, he was actually subject to what is euphemistically called a restraining order.
Well,
Um,
just a correction there, Lawrence. He wasn't killed by police.
I think they crashed into him, is what I've understood.
It's just a motor vehicle accident that
With
hasn't, and nothing has been determined whether the police did it on purpose or if he did it. So,
oh no, but I didn't mean purposely. What I meant was it was a police car that
yeah,
crashed into his
yeah,
car.
yeah.
Um, um, and I won't comment on whatever that actual story is, but that did happen. This is a chap who was restrained from one of the victims and yet was released over and over again. And this goes back to a problem that the liberals again put into place with amendments of the criminal code. So you have a minimization uh, um, in terms of bail conditions. That is, the greatest effort is supposed to be on the release of these criminals. And this is easily resolvable with an amendment to the criminal code to restore balance. But these liberals aren't going to do that. We see that. And this isn't the Liberal Party of the stalwarts historically, of Paul Martin, of Jacques Chrétien. We see this over and over again, and it's a real problem. And we see it also even on the temporary foreign workers program, where one moment they say one thing. Mr. Carney himself, in 2000, I can't remember, 2011 or 2013, he made a statement saying, we've got to slow down on the temporary foreign workers program. They shouldn't take the lowering paying jobs for a number of solid economic reasons. Now he says, really, we have to let it keep going and going. And really that inconsistency, it's, I guess, the best emblem of that or metaphor for that is at the Calgary Stampede, we saw he couldn't flip a pancake, but he can flip every single darn policy over and over and over again. It's we need to do better.
Anytime politicians talk, when I was there, I always wanted to play that old song from the 80s, You Spin Me Round, Round, Round. The spin is there. I think it's a valid point of what you're talking about the repeat offenders. And before we go to Royce, I want to ask you this, Lawrence, for a real quick reply. How come we can't hold these judges accountable? If a judge gives them parole or gives them bail, they commit a crime again. Why aren't we holding the judges accountable for saying you made a mistake there, and now this judge has to learn, like, can put a heavier sentence in that place, or not, or Crown attorneys saying, look, they've already been convicted once, let's keep them in jail. The Crown does have the opportunity to ask those questions, or of a judge, do they not?
It's not like that. It's more complicated than that. I was just at a meeting actually the other day with the federal justice critic, and there's a lot of talk about this exact problem. So in many jurisdictions across Canada, and we have to take a Canada-wide approach to this. This isn't a Manitoba problem. It's a Canada problem. They actually are limiting the amount of time that the Crown can make submissions, first of all. Secondly, it often doesn't go to a judge, actually. It goes to sort of a functionary, I'll call it, who deals with it as a judicial justice of the peace or what have you, who deals with the release program. But they really are only interpreting the law, and the amendment to the criminal code that focuses on the release as opposed to community safety, that's where the imbalance comes in. And that was a Liberal amendment. These are just facts. This is not a political diatribe by me. These are facts. They amended it to focus on the release instead of on balancing community safety.
But Carney
And
did
that's,
say they're looking at that now.
well, my God, this is it really almost, if not entirely, a national emergency. Convene Parliament. You've
Yeah,
had months and months and months, and get to it. That's your job.
yeah.
It's that
Yeah,
simple. That father who was killed in front of his kids, that's it's a terrible situation. We don't need more liberals studying problems and exacerbating the problems. We need solutions, and these are straightforward solutions that are available. Sorry,
And
right?
yeah. Well, one of the police chiefs from Southern Ontario said if there's a home invasion, you should comply with the comply was the word they used. Don't get in the way. or you might get shot like that poor father did just a few days ago. Lawrence made some great points there. The truth is that judges and the police, they respond to the criminal code and to laws and amendments that the government passes. If we want to make changes, that has to happen at the government level. You need a government that's going to amend the criminal code to bring about the kinds of changes that we want. The Liberals are not willing to do that. We also need a government that's going to appoint judges that are going to interpret the charter, going to interpret the Constitution in a way that makes sense. We've seen some decisions from the Supreme Court that have made it very hard for the police to crack down on these kinds of issues. And so those two things need to happen. In, I think, Markham, we had a situation in which an 11-year-old, I think you mentioned this, Kevin, he shot someone. He was out on bail. No, 12 years old. 12 years old. He was out on bail, shot someone, and then got out on bail as a result of that. My daughter's about to turn 12 years old. I don't know how these things happen, but crime, and I think actually youth crime, is turning into a bit of a sleeper issue in this country. There's a
So
very clear division between the conservatives and the liberals on this issue, and it is going to become much more important in the weeks and months to come, I think.
it's interesting on youth crime because during my time as chair of the Winnipeg Police Board, talking to officers and such and investigators, a lot of youth crime is gang related, right? It's how you get initiated into a gang, and they go after kids at high school and lower, and because they know that they can use these kids and they don't face a conviction. But at some point, right, we got to go back and say, at some point, where's the parents? And I know everyone talks about, well, there's systemic issues. There's poverty is a big part of it. But your parents have to take some accountability with this that's going on, as well as the government. But I think we don't have in place now, and maybe it's just the bail, but we don't have in place really any accountability. Like if you commit a crime, you're not going to do that much time in Canada.
Well, let me add a couple things on both the bail issue and the youth criminal justice issue. On the bail issue, this principle of restraint that arises from what was Bill C-75 requires the least restrictive conditions for the release in terms of bail. And that is a mistake. So that section has to be, and it was a liberal amendment, has to be removed. And you have to focus, I would argue, instead on community safety. And if they made that legislative change, basically returning to what it was beforehand, we'd be a lot further ahead, in my view. In terms of the Supreme Court, there was the IM case that was released in July, I think, that dealt with youth criminal justice. I wrote about this. This is a 17-year-old, 17 and a half, who stabbed somebody repeatedly, hit this young victim's mom. It's a long, terrible story. The trial division judge sentenced this person as an adult. I would argue quite properly. The Court of Appeal upheld it. The Supreme Court, for what I would argue would be very subjective reasons, overturned it so that this guy, who will be likely, according to the expert reports talked about by the Supreme Court, likely to commit more crimes in the future, will be out no later than the summer of 2026, maybe earlier. And that's a big problem. So there needs to be amendments to that as well. And people need to understand that really, if the trial division judge sees the case, interprets it, the Supreme Court ought to be pretty reluctant to intervene with its own subjective findings, with all due respect.
And that case will make it harder for judges to sentence youth as adults moving
Exactly.
forward.
Exactly.
And
right.
so it's going to have long ripple effects as a result of those justices' decision. We haven't had a real debate about youth crime in this country since the 1990s, when the Reform Party was around. Some old timers might remember the Reform Party MP Art Hanger. He went to Singapore to investigate the use of corporal punishment for young offenders. Maybe we should cane people. The government did not accept that recommendation. But now you look at the Youth Justice Act, it seems like the product of a bygone era. When you open the newspaper, and almost every day there's a shocking story about violent crime committed by very young repeat offenders, 12 years old, 13 years old. Something has to be done. And I understand this is a distasteful topic, the idea that we kind of, no one wants to crack down on youth. I mean, it's terrible there, but there's real concern. And I think this is something that we're going to be grappling with in the months to come.
I
Well,
think you're right.
the
Sorry,
Winnipeg Sun, sorry, the Winnipeg Sun is looking into a story right now, but about truancy in schools, and in some of the highest crime areas with youth crime, truancy is through the roof, is what we're hearing, right? They're not going to school, and I remember my mom telling me a story that her and her brother skipped school for 3 days in a row, and then the truant officer showed up at their house and their mom and dad treated that with corporal punishment in a sense, and they never skipped school again. And I think that story was more for me not to skip school. But you're right, there has to be some accountability. I mean, look how much the country has grown in the last 10 years because of these immigration policies. Have we ever built a new jail? We've built to replace old ones and put ones to bed, but w what happens? What happens when that bleeding heart? And you don't use that term derogatory, but you're going to have a lot of people coming out saying, "Oh, you can't put people in jail. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. You can't put them in jail." And there was an officer, a commander that I was talking to once who I said it best. You can't arrest your way out of a problem. He said that he doesn't believe that. He said you can't re-arrest your way out of a problem. And that's what we're doing is we're trying to re-arrest our way out of a problem.
I want to point out a difference that we're not talking here about, the young person who makes a mistake or two. We're talking about very serious, violent criminal offenses that are repeated and escalate. They don't just repeat, they escalate. And those are the people, and it's fair enough to say some of them come from very dysfunctional homes. Fair enough. But the answer to that is not to say, hey, let's release this person, usually back to the community that they come from. So those increasing violent occurrences happen to those same communities. And that's a huge problem. And I'm afraid in those cases, we have to be a lot stronger. Again, there's a difference between the one or two mistakes and these violent repeat offenders. And I think it's been pointed out before by others that there's not tons of these people. It's not like there's an epidemic and the jails would overflow. When the Conservatives federally did essentially, I'll use this term, the three strikes and you're out essentially policy that was overturned by the court, there was a lot of talk that, oh my God, we'll have to build more jails. The jails will overflow. That's not what happened, actually. There were actually, I think even now, there's about a 12% vacancy rate in federal prisons. I don't want to use the term vacancy rate, but I'll call it a vacancy rate. And really, if we just get those repeat violent offenders and incarcerate them and start releasing them, we won't have to necessarily build more jails, but we'll have much safer streets.
Yeah, big agreement, big agreement. We're not talking about thousands and thousands of young people. We're talking about a relatively small group of people who are repeat violent offenders. And for some of them, like the horse has kind of left the barn. You have to deal with this already. For others, we know what works in terms of intervention programs for at-risk youth that are at risk for being recruited by gangs. Those sorts of things need investment. We used to have great programs in Manitoba. Sel Burrows has a lot of expertise here in Winnipeg. He's fantastic on this issue. But you can't invest in those kinds of programs on the one hand and on the other not be dealing with people that actually are committing the crimes.
Yeah, and I think just to add to it, there was a young boy, I think 12, in Lethbridge just a couple days ago who stabbed his sister but told the police and somebody who broke in and all that. But again, you're right. It's not a lot of people. It's a few people, and we're not dealing with it. I also don't think the media in general is dealing with it because, as Lawrence said, the government and the prime minister has the opportunity to recall parliament and change this law tomorrow. They could do it Monday morning if they wanted to. They could get in there and they could have a vote and away it we go, and we would have change immediately in the country. They're not doing that. But what we see in the media is that, propping up Carney for whatever reason, saying that he's ending Trudeau policies and this is another policy that he's looking at. And I want to be fair. Like, it's not fair to keep saying Trudeau policies because it's all the same people that got elected with the exception of Carney.
Yeah.
It's all Trudeau's people. So that is a big part of it. And we're only going to get change when we get the Liberal government, as both of you have said, to get in there, pass the law, change the bail reform, and then let's start looking at the accountability. I want to change subjects. Lawrence, you brought up something before we started taping today's show about a letter that 80% of the Liberal caucus refused to sign. Tell us more about that.
This is, I think, one of the most shameful incidents in modern liberal policy history. This is really quite remarkable. Anthony Housefather, who's a Liberal MP from Mount Royal, I've appeared before him once when I was called to Parliament to talk about the Divorce Act some years ago. So I know him a little bit. He wrote a letter talking about anti-Semitism and basically saying, hey, this is exploding. The Jewish population in Canada is just under 1%, and yet they constitute 70% of the victims of hate crimes on a religious basis. So he wrote a letter and he asked his colleagues to sign it, saying, hey, we have to fight anti-Semitism. This was not in the letter. There was nothing about Israel, nothing about foreign policy, nothing about anything else. We need to fight anti-Semitism. Only 20% of his colleagues agreed to sign it. 80% of his colleagues refused to sign a letter calling out anti-Semitism. Now, historically, there have been some great folks in the Liberal Party. We think in Manitoba of Charles Huband, Izzy Asper. We think federally, perhaps, of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin.
Jim Carr.
Perhaps. And we say, how could this be that 80% of the Liberal Party of the Liberal caucus is refusing to sign such a simple ask? And it's such an abdication of responsibility. The Liberal Party has a history. Many years after entering into terrible policies, we see crocodile tears in the House of Commons and an apology. I feel like this is going to be one of those moments 50 years from now that they're going to say we really should have done better. It's time for the Liberal Party to do better at the time. And it seems to me that I wonder, where is Lloyd Axworthy? Where is he? Why is he not criticizing this? Where is Jean Chrétien? Where, if you're a child of Izzy Asper, where are you not saying this is not my Liberal Party? Because it's ridiculous that they so willingly abdicate their responsibility. And it's not a political thing. As I said, it's not pro-Israel or whatever. This is a simple, tiny ask to say anti-Semitism is bad, and 80% of that caucus won't sign it.
I'm going to get Royce to comment. Lawrence, I'm going to get Royce to comment on that, but I want to put up a picture. This is from Concordia University, and it is their 25-26 student handbook. It has the Palestine flag on it. It has Stop Genocide and all kinds of other protesters within the photo. And this is the student handbook of Concordia University. Royce, come on.
Yeah, we've seen an increase in these sorts of things over time. If you don't deal with them when they're small, they get bigger and bigger. To Lawrence's point, 20% of the Liberal caucus, I'm surprised it was that high. What we've seen with the Liberal Party under the former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is the Liberal Party stopped being a big tent party. We used to call it that. It became a much more kind of narrow party. You used to have all sorts of different people, different interests represented in the Liberal Party. People don't realize this. There used to be a powerful pro-life contingent of MPs in the Liberal Party right up until Paul Martin into the 2000s. And, they didn't always get their way, but they were present. They had a voice. And Justin Trudeau ended that. He said, you have to kind of commit to being a pro-choice politician to run for the Liberal Party. And increasingly, we're seeing this sort of sorting taking place on the Israel-Palestine issue. Anthony Housefather is a very rare MP in the Liberal Party of Canada. I'm surprised he's stuck it out as long as he has. He's kind of one of the lone voices in that party on this issue.
I just want to add something to that. When you see, though, him and there's Erwin Kotler as well, a terrific defender of human rights, not only for Jewish people, but for many, many others, Nelson Mandela, among other people. Where are they? How is it that these people are not putting people and Canadian values and anti-discrimination policies ahead of party? How is it that they're putting party first? I think it's an abysmal abdication of their responsibilities. And I think actually it's like a modern version of the banality of evil. They're just letting it slide and prioritizing something else. And it's just unacceptable, completely unacceptable. Every one of these stalwarts of the Liberal Party should be coming out and saying, this is unacceptable. Mr. Axworthy should, and Mr. Kotler should, and others should. And I'm appalled that none of them have done that, as I'm appalled that 80% of the caucus refused to sign this. And I should say this as well, 100% of the Conservative caucus after that signed a letter saying exactly what one would expect. The simple ask, anti-Semitism, bad.
Well, fear is a powerful motivator. And maybe that's got something to do with it because, mentioned the Concordia student handbook again. That's not what should be on the front of the front page of a student handbook in this country. It just should not be. And it's very, very disappointing to see that and see, of course, how it's unfolding. And I want to wrap up here, but I also want to mention that the Canadian government and Canadian media should be paying more attention to the fact that Hezbollah and Hamas are actually doing fundraising in Canada.
That's right.
There's projects going on where they're fundraising in Canada. How does the government let this happen? These are terrorist organizations. This isn't about anything else other than they are terrorist organizations. Canada recognizes them and notes them as terrorist organizations. And we are allowing Hezbollah and Hamas to do fundraising here. That should be shut down in seconds. Where's CSIS in all this? Where's the RCMP? Get these people and get them out of here and stop it somehow.
And frankly, the PFLP through Samadoun, which has been now designated terrorist, but they're still fundraising. The public safety minister who had to recuse himself because of his previous involvement with Tamil, I gather, terrorist entities. Yeah. It's really a moral bankruptcy that we see, and it makes one wonder as well. Certain groups that seem very organized, they were out with signs on October 8th in 2023, very organized, very well funded. Where is that money coming from? How far into the Liberal cabinet does the reach go? It's a really interesting question and very, very, very problematic for Canada.
It's embarrassing for me as a Canadian.
And I got to tell you, like Bill Maher, you talked about universities. Bill Maher called and I don't say all universities, the applied sciences, I think, are fine, but he called the social science departments at many universities, he called them not universities, but ignorance factories.
Yeah.
Well, I will take some exception to that.
As you should, my friend.
Except for Royce's course. Except for Royce.
Well, and a few others.
And a few others. Fair enough.
I think I should get a doctorate now. No, I'm gonna support you, Royce. So you can just pass one along. Gentlemen, thank you for the discussion. And again, just on the fundraising issue, it is embarrassing, I think, for all Canadians, and it's troubling to see this. But I want to say something that Lawrence always says: we want Canada to be successful. We want Canada to thrive. The prime minister is the prime minister, and we're just here to hold them accountable, but also to say, look, we can get behind you if you start doing these things that will make our country better. So that's really what I think we're saying. We're not taking sides with either political party. We're having an open and fair discussion. I want to take a moment to thank the people that are following our page now. We have over 9,000 followers. That's fantastic. We ask you to like this video and, of course, follow us and help us grow our reach as we talk about issues that are impacting Canada. Gentlemen, great discussion. Thank you so much. Look forward to next week.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Royce.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching Inside Politics with Kevin Klein. Please like and subscribe to this channel and visit thewinnipegsun.com for more.